Hi AJ.
G'day, Barb.
Thanks for joining me today. I wanted to talk about a very controversial and interesting topic for me today on abortion. It's of interest to me because I've had 2 abortions myself.
Yeah.
Something that I'm not proud of, but something that I have to deal with, and
Yeah.
I feel there's many women in my situation who have to
Yes.
deal with that.
Yeah.
And I also feel there's many of other people involved in the decision process that need to face the responsibility that they were involved in those decisions as well.
Sure, like many men, for instance, were involved in the decision of their wives or partners or
Yes.
occasional partner being having an abortion, and therefore many of those men bear a fair degree of responsibility as well.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So, yeah, I've got lots of questions today.
Sure.
Okay, we might not get through it all, so there could possibly be part 2
Yeah, no
if we
worries.
need to.
That's fine.
But yeah, I mentioned as just starting that it's very controversial and has been throughout our society's history forever, I dare say, because of the moral issues that we've not faced about it, some of the ethical issues, political issues, and the practical issues of it that surround the topic abortion and the act of abortion.
Medical issues and all sorts of issues. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
So, moral issues, AJ, maybe that's probably a good one to start on, I think. And then
Well,
I'm going to go into lots of other topics as well, which hopefully will flow.
Yeah, well, I feel probably all of the issues need to be resolved, but obviously the moral issues, there is a lot of controversy around the moral issues themselves. So the main reason why there's controversy is because everybody, basically, when it comes to a moral opinion, has a different opinion. And what I would like to probably say first up is that what I would like to present is not my own opinion of the issue, but rather what I've observed through 2,000 years of my life of the issue in the spirit world, because I've had the advantage over most people in the sense that I've watched the entry of these aborted children come to the spirit world. So therefore I had the ability to see it from all angles, what's going on for the mother, what's going on for the father, what's going on for society, and also what's going on for the child. And I feel that's probably the most important issue as to what really is going on for the child. But I want to say probably first up with this issue and any other moral issue that I ever discuss with people, it's important to understand the difference between the presentation of truth about the issue and the issue of judgment or moral judgment that people have. So I do not have any moral judgment, for example, for a murderer. I don't have any moral judgment of a rapist. I don't have any moral judgment of many other, what we would call on earth, like violent type of crimes. I don't have any moral judgment for the person who actually does those crimes. I do, though, want to state the truth about the effects of these crimes and the effects on love and the effects on the people that these crimes are perpetrated against, and also the effect of, we'll just wait for that to go, the effects of, on the perpetrator of these particular things that happen. And so for some people currently on the earth, abortion is viewed as a crime, and therefore they have a lot of moral judgment to anybody who does or actually commits that crime. I don't have that same moral judgment. So I want to help any person to become more loving, and that includes helping a murderer or a rapist or a person who other people judge as an abortionist or whatever. And I feel it's very important to state up front. Secondly, it's very important to state up front, I feel, with this particular subject, that there is actually no need for anybody to have any judgment upon any crime. The main reason why we have judgment is because we have a lot of hurt about the issues inside of us. On either side of the judgment fence, we have a lot of hurt. And the more hurt you release internally about any of these issues, the less judgment you actually feel. That doesn't mean, though, that the issue, whatever the issue is, for example, the issue of murder, that doesn't mean that the issue of murder does not have a moral answer. But so I'm not saying that I am amoral when it comes to any of these issues, because I've got some very definite things that I've observed from the spirit world, and therefore have some very, very firm moral stances about these particular issues. However, I don't feel the persons who commit these particular things, these things against the morality, need to be judged in any way. They just need to have some assistance if they want it. Even I don't need to force it upon them. So any person who's listening to this interview need to bear in mind that I'm not trying to force any moral stance upon them. I am just going to be presenting God's stance to you, and it's up to you to make your own choices and decisions, like it always is.
Well, going through all of the questions, that actually puts me a little bit more at ease and makes me feel a little bit more comfortable about asking these questions, because then I know you're not judging me, and I actually feel that as well.
Yeah. And you know that I love you and care about you. We've known each other long enough now to know that, and I haven't treated you any different after you told me you had an abortion than before. No,
you never have. And that I'm grateful for. Yeah. So look, let's talk about the definition of abortion first of all. Wikipedia defined abortion as a termination of a pregnancy by the removal or expulsion from the uterus of a fetus or embryo prior to viability. Now, we'll come back to that.
So then there's the definition of viability.
Yes, we'll come back to that. Yep. And then the Webster Dictionary defines it as the act of giving premature birth, particularly the expulsion of the human fetus prematurely or before it is capable of sustaining life. Right. Okay, so is there such a time when the fetus or embryo can be classified prior to viability or before it is capable of sustaining life?
All right, so that's a fairly important question. The answer bluntly is no. From God's perspective and what you observe in the spirit world, when a couple get together and they have sex, at the moment of conception is the moment that the soul of the child has actually been attached to the spirit body and physical body that the conceived embryo, if you like, it's not even an embryo at that point, it's just a cells dividing. And this happens within a few moments of conception. And when I say a few moments, not a very long period at all. And in fact, in many cases, if the woman in particular is sensitive to that attachment of the soul to the growing, shall we call it, organism within the womb at that point, then she will also feel that that conception has taken place, because she'll be able to feel and sense the soul of the child already. Yeah.
I must admit, this wasn't part of my questions, but I must admit, the 2 pregnancies that I aborted, I didn't feel that. But at the age later on in life, around 40, I fell pregnant again, and I knew instantly that I was pregnant.
Exactly.
And when I told my husband at the time, how would you know that? But
exactly.
I instantly knew.
The reason why the earlier stages you didn't feel it is because the human mind has a large... denial has a large effect on what you feel, and the human mind in denial has a very large effect on what it feels from its own body even. So there are many people who feel very little pain in their own body, and yet as soon as they connect, they stop using denial as a tool to control what happens to their body, then they start feeling the pains in the different body. And it's a similar principle when it comes to pregnancy, although pregnancy isn't a pain in the body. But if the mind is in denial and does not want to be pregnant, then that has a very, very large effect on whether the person is sensitive to the pregnancy actually occurring.
And that was the case in my first 2 pregnancies, but in the 3rd pregnancy I was desiring it.
That's correct.
Yes.
So since you were desiring it, you were now open to the knowing of it, and the instant you became pregnant, you knew straight away. And the reason why is because the little tiny soul, if we could call it, it's a soul in their first incarnation. It's not a reincarnated soul, but a first incarnation soul that's now attached to those organisms which become bodies growing in you. There's 2 bodies growing inside of the womb. One is a physical body, and the other is a spirit body. They look almost identical to each other as they grow. Their genetic structure is very similar. And as they grow, eventually the woman generally becomes aware because of the changes to her body, but she is capable of being aware right from the moment of conception.
Thank you. I'd like to just mention a few religious viewpoints on abortion at this
Sure.
stage. Our early Christian traditions, Judo-Christians, dating back thousands of years, has always valued the unborn human life. The teaching of the 12 Apostles states, "You shall not kill the child in the womb or murder a newborn infant."
And even like in Judaism before Christianity, there were penalties associated with the hitting of a woman who was pregnant, and then causing the abortion, the miscarriage, if you like, of the child. That was actually condemned, and in fact, the person could actually be stoned to death for such an act under Judaism law. So it began many thousands of years ago. This condemnation, if you like, of the abnormal termination of a child's life.
The Catholic Church opposes abortion because it believes that life is sacred and inviolable. Orthodox churches generally forbid abortion as going against the commandments, "They shall not kill." The Church of England states that the unborn child is alive and created by God. Islam teaches that life begins at conception and is created by God. Abortion on any grounds is forbidden in the Islamic Holy Book, chapter 6, verse 151, states, "Do not kill or take a human life which God has declared to be sacred." Judaism, the Jewish law forbids the taking of innocent life and stresses that human beings are made in the image of God. Even a fetus in its mother's womb is made in the image of God. Hinduism. Scriptures refer to abortion as womb killing and describe abortionists as the greatest of sinners. Gandhi himself said, "It is clear to me as daylight that abortion should be a crime." Would be, a crime. So it appears that our major
all
religions...
Of these religions feel very similarly.
They all had it right.
Well, they all feel very similarly on the matter. I feel why morally they do have it correct to a degree. Their judgment of the person who commits an abortion is where they morally exceed their boundaries. So in other words, it's okay to state the truth as it's apparent in terms of, and the truth as from God's perspective about an issue. It's quite a different thing then to have a judgment upon the people who disobey that truth. And that's where I feel most religions take this way too far. So for example, if we look at Judaism in my time in the first century, and a purposeful abortion was taken as a crime, but they then stoned to death the mother. So rather than looking at the reasons why the mother did the thing, helping her to correct her behaviour in some way, or helping her see what the emotional perspective was. And a lot of times it was driven by her being raped or some other thing that was, and yet the father or the man who raped her was not addressed in any way under these circumstances. So often there was a large degree of unfairness in the way in which a woman was treated with regard to having committed an abortion. The same applies to many of the religions. And you know, unfortunately, it's one thing, and this is why I wanted to say at the beginning, it's one thing to state this is the truth from God's perspective. It's quite another thing then to take action against the person who commits the crime, which actually in itself is another crime. The actual taking action of a person who committed the first crime is, from God's perspective, another crime that's been committed by the persons who take that action. So for example, when a group of people project a huge amount of rage at a person who's had abortion in the past, now they are committing another crime. That group of people, not the person who committed the abortion, the group of people who are angry are committing another crime.
And so it grows and grows.
And so it grows and grows. And this is where I feel religions exceed their boundaries. So while it's one thing to present God's perspective on the matter, and all the religious viewpoints generally you have as their basic principle God's viewpoint on the matter, while it's fine to present that viewpoint on the matter, it is quite harmful then to take vindictive or angry or resentment-based actions against the people who perpetrate such crimes. So this is the case with any crime, by the way. Anything that any person dictates as a crime. The fact that you're now angry and the fact that you're now attacking them and the fact that you attempted to use violence against them, and there are many people who are very hard line with abortionists, even prepared to use violence against them, and this illustrates how way out of harmony with God they are in terms of their judgment. So while I agree with some of the perspectives of some of those religions, I cannot agree with their underlying them using that as the basis for an underlying attack upon a person who has committed anything that they believe to be a crime.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We'll go there from that, because that leads straight on to the legal status of abortion within countries.
Sure.
Okay, and worldwide governments have frequently banned abortion and otherwise limited it by law.
Yep, and it's very different, isn't it, in every country?
Every country.
Yeah, depending on their religious background and so forth.
And I looked up probably about 30 or 40 countries, and it was an interesting concept.
Yeah. Even in our country here, in every state, it's very different. Yeah.
Notably, though, abortion rates are similar in countries where the procedure is legal to countries where it's not illegal.
Exactly. So the law has really had no effect on abortion rates, really.
Yeah.
Yep.
And abortion is legal in majority of countries for the following reasons: to save a woman's life, to preserve physical health, to preserve mental health, in the case of rape or incest, fetal impairment, or economic and social terms. Now, that covers a lot of situations.
It does, and unfortunately, if we look at all of those things that you listed, they are all the effects of other problems. So this is something that often happens in humanity, is we make a series of laws only to address the effect of problems rather than the cause. So, for example, one of the things you mentioned is, let's make abortion okay in the case of rape, for example. Well, that doesn't deal with the fact that the woman's been raped, and it doesn't address why she's been raped. It doesn't address the male who raped her and what's going on with him and why he's actually committed that crime. So all it does is it create another law based on an effect. In other words, she's been raped, now we've got to deal with the consequences of the rape. So the problem that I see with almost all laws in humanity at the moment is they primarily deal with effects only. They don't actually address the causes. For example, a woman getting sick during pregnancy, for example, there is a cause to that, and there are specific causes to this that generally the medical profession blames on the pregnancy, but actually it has other reasons emotionally for causing it. And instead of discovering those reasons emotionally, because they don't believe that emotions can create physical problems, they then go down the track of dealing with the effect of the woman getting sick and so forth, which is recommending to the woman that she has an abortion to save her own life, for example. And the problem with all of these kind of laws, I feel, is they do not address the actual cause. And if you don't address the cause, then you're just going to have to continually handle the effects over and over again. And
usually create more and more laws.
Of course, because each effect becomes more complex. As we stop addressing causes, each effect becomes more complex. Then we've got to create even more complex laws to address the effects. And eventually nobody, even the lawyers, know what the law is on a particular matter because it's been modified so many times and so forth. I feel that is not the way to address these issues. But it is the way many governments address the issues, of course, because they feel powerless to address the issue any other way. But I'm happy to answer the question associated with it. That's the question.
Well, I'm saying that covers now a lot of situations. So are you saying that all these countries, governments and persons of authority have it all wrong? Because we base our decisions often on what the law says we can do.
Of course. And yes, I do believe they have it all wrong in a lot of ways because they're creating laws to deal with effects rather than laws to address causes. The way God works is that all of God's laws address causes and not effects. And in fact, God's notices the effect but wants us to address the cause so that the effect can never occur again. The problem with humanity is we don't understand the relationship between cause and effect. We do scientifically understand it most of the time. You know, a person knows, if they come along.
I've struggled with it.
Well, scientifically, you know that if you drive a car into a brick wall, you know, the car is going to crumple. That's the effect. What was the cause? Me driving it into the wall. If I don't drive it into the wall, I won't have the effect of my front end of my car crumpling, right?
I've always found it in those type of situations that simplistic and practical, so I can understand it. But when it comes to emotional reasons of why you did things, that's more complex and harder.
It's more complex, but and perhaps more difficult to address. Although it might just seem so, mostly because most people on the earth are living in their minds and therefore not able to feel their emotions well and therefore not able to see the underlying cause. My suggestion is if you're able to feel your emotions, you often very, very rapidly understand the cause of whatever event occurred and what your underlying motive was to actually take that action. So why we've got to be careful too when we judge society, when we look at society and analyse it, that we don't analyse it through the error that we're already in. And this is another thing that humanity has a habit of doing. In other words, what we do is we look at something happening. For example, we often see this with animals. We look at animals eating each other and then we go, so God must have created it that way. Now that is basically removing ourselves as having any potential cause or influence on the actual result. So what we do is we basically saying, well, God created it that way and that gives me the justification for eating animals and it gives me the justification for a lot of other things, without actually realising that actually me and my emotions are affecting these animals eating each other. And once my emotions change, the animals don't eat each other anymore. And that cause is never addressed because nobody ever thinks of that as a potential answer. So what we do instead, through our observation, is we observe something happening, and then we think that is how God made it to be, when it's not how God made it to be. It's how mankind modified it to be through their condition, through their soul-based condition. And this is the same problem here. Mankind often looks at a situation, sees it without understanding all of the causes, and then changes laws to change the effect, which actually create oftentimes more causes that they then have to address with more laws addressing the effects of those causes, rather than actually addressing the cause from the beginning.
On that subject, and it probably is another topic, but that would relate to the female body and the whole contraception thing and the whole.
Why does the average girl become sexually able to conceive a child at a time when she is not emotionally able to handle the conception? Why does that happen? Well, there's an emotional reason why that happens. That's in all of humanity, actually. And once that emotional reason is addressed, then that problem won't occur. Her body and her emotions will develop at the same speed, and when she's emotionally able to handle giving birth to a child, she will also physically be able to conceive. We're doing this all the time with many matters, and we need to stop for a moment and see actually that we are very adverse to addressing the actual cause of an issue, because we often believe it to be too complex. And so what we try to do is create a whole set of laws to address the effect of the issue, because we feel that that's easier to understand. But in fact, what it does is it creates more complex causes, which then have more complex effects. And in the end, we end up in total confusion as to what's right and what's wrong right across the board in all areas of our lives. Yeah.
Wow. Let's talk about some statistics.
Sure.
Okay. We have an estimated 44 million abortions performed globally each year, with slightly over half of those performed unsafely.
That's correct.
Unsafe abortions result in approximately 70,000 deaths.
Of the mothers?
Yes, and 5 million disabilities per year globally.
Correct.
These figures have come from the World Health Organisation.
Yes, and I feel they're a bit under, actually, what's actually really going on.
Yeah. So in the spirit world, you mentioned before that you've seen the results of these 44 to 50 million abortions.
Well, there's a group of children who pass over in the spirit world who have been aborted, and there is also a group of children who have passed over in the spirit world who have been miscarried. And if you add both of those groups together in terms of, because sometimes their emotions are very similar, of those children, it ends up into the hundreds of millions per annum
Yes.
of these things occur, where nearly 200 million children every single year who attempt to incarnate onto Earth and have a life-based experience on Earth don't make it through to birth.
It's interesting you picked the 200 because I had read 205 million approximately.
Yeah, around about that figure.
It's a lot, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a lot.
It's hard to get my head around
Now,
that.
some of those have been, from the mother's perspective or the father's perspective, have been intentionally terminated. So that's what I would classify as an abortion. And then there's others. So my classification of abortion is anything from the moment of conception, where a person has taken an intentional attitude towards a child where it wishes to terminate its life. And unfortunately, we tell ourselves a lot of things that it's not even a child and all sorts of things.
Yep,
But we'll talk about that as we go through, I'm sure. The other 150 million or so plus are ones that the mothers feel are not intentional, but unfortunately do have a large bearing, again, based on the mother's and father's emotional condition and what kind of demands they are placing upon the soul of the child, which causes the child to exit. The soul and the spirit body no longer can maintain a connection with the spirit body, and therefore life can't be maintained by the physical body of the person who's in the womb, and so the child in the womb dies, as the saying goes. Of course, the child itself isn't died, it's just moved on to the spirit world under those circumstances. But yeah, there's over 150 million of those happening every single year as well. And each of them have different emotional reasons for happening, but we need to address their causes.
So, well, it's actually mind-blowing, isn't it? So what are the main emotional injuries that that would cause a woman to have an abortion then, do you believe, in our society today? And has that emotional injury, I suppose, changed over history?
Well, it's interesting, firstly, that you ask the question and say that caused the woman to have an abortion. See, I don't view it that way either.
Okay.
I view it as causing the couple to have an abortion, because both the male and the female who have conceived have a direct responsibility for the life of the child they've conceived. And so it's not just the woman's responsibility for the abortion, it's also the man's responsibility for the abortion as well. So what we need to do is look at the emotions in both the woman and the man that might cause them to consider an abortion. And if you ask that question, well, now there's a huge number of emotions. For instance, many women have actually had abortions not because they wanted to, but because their man told them that they had to, otherwise the man would leave them. So you could say, under those circumstances, the man had the desire to not have the child. The man didn't want to recognise the child that he'd created, and what he's done is he's now emotionally trying to force the woman into an abortion by threatening her and saying, I am not going to have a relationship with you if you have this child, right? Now, the woman, obviously, under those circumstances, has an emotion where she's willing to pander to the man's desires and sacrifice even her own feelings for the sake of this relationship. So that is an emotional injury that she has, where she's willing to sacrifice the life of another person, a third party, the child itself, for the sake of maintaining this relationship. So that should tell her how strongly and badly she has a neediness for the relationship, and yet she is not considering the character of the man. He's willing to leave her under this circumstance, so therefore his character is already quite unstable in terms of having a stable, loving marriage or a stable, loving partnership. So this is where many people skip over many issues. So in the scenario I just gave, who has the primary responsibility? Well, the man, firstly, is threatening the woman, I am not going to look after the child, I am not going to have a relationship with you if you have this child. So there's the threat towards the woman. The woman obviously believes the threat, which is her first error emotionally. Secondly, she is willing to sacrifice the life of a child for the sake of pandering to this perceived threat, which is another emotional injury, where she's willing to then tell herself that this is not a life, it's not yet a developed child, so I can get rid of it now and I'm safe in this relationship. So you see her feelings of a lack of safety, not having a man in her life, not having the father in her life, and a lot of other things would cause her then to take the action. So So the issue of the emotional reasons why a person would take the step of having an abortion is very, very complicated. And I've only just given one of many hundreds of different emotional reasons. And the emotional reason is never the same for any individual person, ever. That you see commonalities, but each individual person has specific differences that causes them to think differently and emotionally respond differently.
So like in my case, my first abortion was similar to that, where my husband didn't want the child and he paid for me to have the abortion.
Yes.
But I didn't give it another thought.
And why didn't you?
No, well, I obviously
because
had
society
fear.
had already told you something that you wanted to believe. So society is already telling you this isn't a child yet. And so there is an acceptance inside of you that this isn't a child yet, even though if you tuned into your feelings, you would have been able to feel the soul of that child already connected to you, but you push that away. So there was an acceptance already through society. There's this acceptance that it's not a child yet till a certain age, and hence the Webster's, or was it the Webster Dictionary or the Wikipedia definition
Webster,
it was the Webster definition that it didn't have viable life yet, and so therefore we can terminate it's not really a child yet. Not understanding how the actual process of conception actually works. You see, there is this belief system also on the planet through science and medical profession that the child is a physical entity, right? And not understanding that the child is actually also, the physical is not the child actually. The physical is just a body the child uses. And the spirit body is also just a spirit body that the child uses for different dimensional existence. The soul is the real child, and that was connected to these two organisms. Even before they became an embryo, they're connected to these two organisms through the soul's connection, and it's the soul that's absorbing the experience. So if people started to understand that it's actually the soul now that feels every single piece of physical pain that organism experiences, the soul experiences all of that. So this physical body and spirit body were created through this process of conception to enable this soul to have an experience in both the physical world and the spirit world. Unfortunately, man is capable of killing the physical body, right? And when I say unfortunately, I don't feel it's an error on God's part. I just feel, unfortunately, the emotions in different people, through choice, make them capable of killing the physical child, not understanding that isn't the actual child. The spirit body is not the actual child either. The actual child is the soul, the half of a soul, in fact, that God created, that split at incarnation. And that particular soul is absorbing the experiences of these bodies. So when somebody puts a vitamizer, and destroys the physical body, all of the pain from that action is absorbed by the soul. And when people start understanding that, then they'll start understanding what's really going on with regard to any of these things, with regard to conception, the pregnancy and abortion and miscarriage and a lot of other issues as well.
Well, we've obviously chosen throughout history not to feel that.
Yes, although when you talk to mothers, if you talk to a mother who would love to have a child, she knows straight away generally when she's pregnant. It's only the ones that wouldn't like to have a child for all sorts of reasons, and some of the reasons you can understand completely. So for example, there are many people who, like in the Catholic religion, forced by the Catholic faith to having child after child after child. By the time they get to the 4th, 5th, 6th or 7th child, they're not allowed to take contraception. And so they're now starting to feel overwhelmed by the process of being a parent. So of course now they're going to start considering their actions as to what kind of action they're going to take, which might be in disharmony with the morality. So even though the Catholic religion states that we don't agree with abortion, and the Catholic religion states we don't agree with conception, if you ask the 1.5 billion Catholics on the planet, whether they actually have contraception and how many of them have actually had abortion. Most of the people who would be a part of the church would be absolutely shocked about the results. And so, that demonstrates that there is something further deeper wrong, and this is what I'm saying about the cause. There are causal reasons that are deeper than just discussing the effect of abortion, because the abortion is the effect of these underlying emotional reasons, which are very different for each person.
Yeah, and you were talking about the pain that the soul feels. So, one of my questions was, does the aborted soul feel any pain during the experience?
Yep.
So it feels physical pain as well as emotional pain?
Both. And in particular, the emotional pain is the worst pain for it, in terms of there are nurses in the spirit world who take the aborted child. The soul is connected to a spirit body now, and the nurses in the spirit world take the aborted child and look after the child. The nurse, one of the biggest problems the nurse faces is actually having the child feel loved when it's already been rejected by its own mother and its own father, and most of the time by both. Both the father and the mother have rejected it, and so this child arrives in the spirit world with huge issues of rejection, emotional issues of rejection, and as a result of that, these spirits who look after the child, the people who look after the child, keep the child very close to them and are constantly emotionally reminding them that they are now loved, even though their mummy and daddy did not love them. Does that make sense? And the emotional, but this is a very emotional process, and it takes quite some time before that aborted child releases those emotions. Now, when I say quite some time, because the child has very little intellectual capacity to resist the emotions, when the child arrives in the spirit world, it often spends days and sometimes months, depending on the severity of the problem. It spends days or months crying as a result of the rejection without even knowing why it's crying. So it has a large amount of sadness and grief to work its way through. Once it works its way through that grief, which is a fairly natural process, and the spirits who look after the child so that it does experience that grief. Once it experiences that grief, it does not then feel a connection to its parents, generally. So it's not emotionally connected to both parents on earth, because both parents rejected it, and both parents have very little love for it as a result. And so it very rarely visits the parents, and it's only when one or both of the parents start thinking about the aborted child and start having some growing feelings of love towards the child that the child might enter a relationship with them again.
And that could be a very long time.
Could be a very long time, or never. In some cases, there are many women who have passed over into the spirit world who have had abortions on earth, who are still what you would classify in the hells of the spirit world, who are yet to actually have a feeling of love towards their aborted child.
Well, I have to say, from my point of view, if I hadn't have heard some of your teachings about God's laws, I wouldn't have been open to
even knowing they existed.
Exactly. Yeah, or wanting to feel it or think about it or anything.
Exactly. So many women who have had abortions on earth pass into the spirit world without even a conception that the child exists in the spirit world, and they could easily find them if they wished to, and actually even learn about them and discover them for the first time. And so there are many women in the spirit world who first pass over, who have committed abortions or had abortions on earth. And there are many men, by the way, exactly the same position. Remember, I'm not separating the men from the women here, because the fathers have just as much of a responsibility. And in fact, many times they have just as much or more responsibility. There have been many women who have had forced abortions through the men that I've been with. And they bear very severe responsibilities, not the women now, but the men who have forced abortion upon their wives bear severe responsibility, and many of those men pass over without any idea of what they've done, and wondering why they're sitting in the depths of darkness in the hells of the spirit world for long periods of time, when they believe themselves to have been a good man or a good woman all their life, without conceiving that the abortion is the reason why that they're in that condition.
That's why they're sitting there. Yeah. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on if you want to. Thank you. Does a late-term abortion have different impacts on on the soul than an early term abortion? I'm talking about the child's soul.
Yes, it does.
It does.
The more the child is developed inside of the womb, the more emotional attachment it has towards its environment, including its mother and its father, and also the more strongly it can feel the sensations of its physical body. So if a late-term abortion occurs, the child has a very, very strong sensations from its physical body. So if you compare that to somebody taking the morning after pill and aborting the child at that point, the physical sensation involved is very, very different. The emotional sensation is also very different because the child's had the chance to attach emotionally to the emotions of its parents while it's in the womb. And so as a result, the longer it stayed in that condition, the more connected it is to the parent's emotions. And so when it is rejected through the process of an abortion, it does have a very, very strong emotional reaction to the abortion when, in comparison to the firstly conceived child. The firstly conceived child might cry for a few days or a week of human time, for example, about its rejection, but because it's now receiving a lot of love from other people in the spirit world, it can easily reattach to those people as their parents, if you like.
Does it have a concept of love at that stage?
It has a concept of love because inbuilt within all of us is this underlying feeling that we know when we're feeling love and we know when we're not. And so, yes, the child has a concept of love at that stage. It doesn't have an intellectual awareness of anything other than how it feels. So it doesn't have that's what the feeling of love is. It doesn't know that at that stage. It just feels. Whereas a child who maybe, let's say a child is aborted at 5 months of it into its term, then it's had 5 months of connection to its mother. It now has a far more developed physical body, almost in a lot of ways, almost completely developed physical body. Most of its limbs are present now, and there's lots of other parts to its body that it's now aware of. And then when the child is aborted, it goes through quite a lot of physical pain, and also quite a lot of emotional pain because of the loss of the connections that it developed up until that time. And so a child in that condition may cry for up to even a year in the spirit world when it first arrives. But most of them, under those circumstances, would cry up to 3 months of time before they've released all of those emotions and how they feel. And then they have the chance then to connect and bond to the person who's nursing them in the spirit world.
That's quite disturbing for me because I was in denial that I was pregnant through fear in both my instances, and sort of almost rubbing vanishing cream on my tummy, So my abortions were both late-term abortions.
Right.
So, that's very disturbing to hear that.
And so, the key is to allow yourself to feel, the emotion. The beauty of this whole thing too is that, you see, the abortion is the effect. This is the thing to remember. It's the effect of a number of causal emotional issues inside of a person. So your taking a late-term abortion was the effect of a number of issues. Firstly, it was the effect of you remaining in denial that you were actually pregnant and wanting to deny that you were pregnant. Can you see there's that effect already? So you would need to examine why you wanted to remain in denial that you were pregnant. Why did you want to ignore that you were pregnant? And there will be all sorts of issues. There will be the father's opinions of the pregnancy, the father's opinions of your relationship, your own opinions of if you have a child, how it will affect the father when he's so anti having the child. And there's all these factors involved in why you wanted to remain in denial. And then also there were a heap of belief systems that you can see that would have been a part of this. So belief systems that it's not really a child until it comes out of my womb in a natural birth or in some kind of birth process, what am I thinking of, a C-section, cesarean section or something like that. And so, there's the thinking that, and this sometimes amazes me, the thinking, often the same doctor who performs an abortion is happy to perform the abortion with the justification of certain actions before the full term of the child. But when the child's become full term, the same doctor will spend hundreds of thousands of dollars and hundreds of hours of his own time trying to save that child. in a human crib or something like that. And this is one of the conundrums, if you like, of the human concept of life, in that we often, because we have a very ill-defined viewpoint of life, unfortunately, on the planet, and as a result of that, we take sometimes completely the opposite actions that you would expect under certain circumstances. The reality is, from God's perspective, the child at the time of conception is now attached to the organisms that are growing within the mother's womb, which eventually turn into the embryo and the fetus, and at the moment of attachment, that particular soul of a child is now experiencing life through that connection. It's now experiencing emotions through that connection. It's now experiencing physical sensations through that connection, even though it is not intellectually conscious until the brains of both bodies develop. It is still emotionally conscious, because the soul is emotionally conscious at the time of conception. Yeah.
You mentioned doctors there and nurses. For people carrying out or assisting or encouraging or defending abortion, what's the impact on their souls?
Yes, a very large impact. Every single one of these people, generally, if they don't change their actions and sort of feel sorry for their actions when they're alive on earth at some point, every one of these people pass into the hells of the spirit world and then go through a process of coming to realise what they've done. Once they realise what they've done, they are able to progress in the spirit world and get out of the condition they were in. But many abortionists are not aware that they assisted murder after murder after murder after murder from the perspective of God's laws, and therefore they arrive in the spirit world with a lot of justification of their actions, but also in a very, very dark condition. And many of them remain in that condition for many hundreds, and I've seen many remain in that condition for thousands of years, actually.
I saw a program on television once, and it was an American program, and it was about, it was an anti-abortion program, and it was about a doctor in America who ran an abortion clinic. And this man had performed thousands and thousands of abortions, and the interview with him, he was in total denial. His health was appalling. He was in bad shape, and my heart just went out to him though, because of the denial that he had about what he was doing. He justified, as you said, when they go to the spirit world continually, he was justifying it down to every level.
Yes.
But physically looking at him, he was a very, very sick, unhealthy man.
Yes.
And so I did. My heart did go out to him.
Yes. It's sad a lot of the times, because many of these people who commit these abortions who actually take the action, the doctors and so forth who take these actions, do not realise that they actually have quite a large numbers of spirits often connected to them, also justifying them taking those actions. So it takes often them passing, and then there's a disconnection from the people who are with them from the spirit world, who are influencing their decisions. And then it often takes many hundreds of years afterwards before they realise that, wow, I've actually committed all of these murders and justified those actions. Once they do, generally there's two ways they can progress. One way is they have to pay for the pain of every one of those children who's been aborted by them. Or they can go through a process of repentance, which is a process of grieving through all of the reasons why you chose to take such actions. And but it is possible for these people in the spirit world to actually get out of their condition as well. So this is why I don't have judgment for them. I'm just saying what they're doing is in disharmony with the laws of love, with the principles of love. But there is a consequence to any action we take that's in disharmony with the principles of love. But any person can also go through a process of clearing away from themselves the reasons why they do such things as well. So every person can change. Even if they pass into the spirit world, they can still change. And this is something where I have a big disagreement with the religious movement, because many of the religions say once you've set your life in a certain pattern here on earth and you die in that condition, then your life in the spirit world is fixed, And this causes a lot more pain in the spirit world, because there's many people who have come to terms with the fact that they've done wrong things when they're on earth, but once they hit the spirit world, they feel that their life is fixed and there's nothing they can do about it now.
That concept has caused me enough pain after meeting you,
Yeah.
let alone when I get to the spirit world.
Yeah.
Because it's just an easy way out. Now I've recognised it. Yeah.
Yeah, so the key is to understand that we can change at any time in our lives. We can come to terms with what we've done here on earth, or we can come to terms with what we've done in the spirit world. We have a choice to do either. My recommendation to all persons is they do it while they're here, because they'll have much more fun in the spirit world after they pass if they do that. But they need to understand too, to a degree, God's laws on many matters, and also God's laws about life. And of course, the issue of abortion is very much about God's laws about life.
Well, talking about on that subject, some say that aborted children would, and us mothers, I suppose, who have aborted children, would say that, well, they're much better off in the spirit world than what they were here with me, because I didn't want them, I wasn't able to love them, and so forth.
Well, I agree that a child is much better off with a person who loves them than with a person who doesn't want them and who is willing to reject them. I agree with that statement. However, the mother is skipping over a lot of issues when she makes that statement. She's skipping over the fact that she has committed a murder from the perspective of the laws of God, and she's skipping over the fact also that she has caused quite a lot of initial pain for that child. That child has got to feel a lot of grief and go through a lot of things that it wouldn't have normally had to have gone through if it had a different life. And so the mother is telling herself a story so that she can avoid some of her feelings of sorrow. And my suggestion to mothers who are doing that is to stop doing that and start allowing yourself to feel the child who you aborted, and allow yourself to feel the real reasons why you aborted them, rather than addressing, just looking at the effects. And sure, it is better that the child is with a person who they love, but even better again would be for them to be with a person who loves them on earth. Now, the reason for this is that many of these children who pass over into the spirit world without first being born on earth have a struggle to understand life to a large degree. Here on earth, it is what you would classify as the nursery of our human existence. And like any nursery, you learn basic things in a nursery. And God intended for all of humanity to go through the nursery, because if you go through the nursery, there's a higher likelihood of you learning these basic things about life and basic principles about love. When a child is aborted before it has that opportunity to learn about life and to learn about love in some way, then it has a bit of a struggle initially to coming to terms with both those things, both with how to exercise its life and also what love is and how love is to be expressed. And there are people in the spirit world who assist the child to go through such transitions, but unfortunately it's a lot harder for them than it would have been if the child was on earth going through the same transition.
I agree with that concept, but in the way the earth is today, it's hard to come with the terms that the nursery in the spirit world wouldn't be better for them than the nursery on earth, in the way we are today.
Well, there's things they can learn on the nursery on earth that it's very, very difficult to teach in the spirit world's nurseries. And there are lots of reasons for that, which I probably can't go into here because of the length of our discussion. But there are lots of reasons why the nurseries are very different in their format, and also very different in the way in which the child learns. And what on earth, there is this sort of natural progression into learning that occurs. So, whereas in the spirit world, unfortunately, children that have been aborted have to be taught how to learn. And that takes a much longer time for the child to come to terms with than it would have done if they were on earth in a condition where they're being loved. They have to first, in the spirit world, these aborted children, go through these terrible emotions of rejection, not being wanted, not being loved, and all of these terrible emotions are the very first emotions they experience. And for that reason, much of their life, unless it's looked after very carefully, much of their life can be dictated by those particular emotions for a specific time in the spirit world. If the child was loved at the beginning of its conception and loved through the process, then it's already the primary emotion it's experiencing right in the beginning of its life is love, not rejection, not hatred, not fear, not any of those other emotions. For that reason, the child, any child who is born on earth through the natural process, has had some experience of being loved, at least, right? Whereas most of and it's rare for a child not to have had some experience of being loved. Whereas in the spirit world, every single child who is aborted has had as its very first experience of rejection, not being loved, not being wanted, not being cared for, not being desired. And so if you think about it, imagine your very first experience of life, instead of it being this feeling that somebody wants you, and this feeling that somebody loves you, and this feeling that somebody cares for you, instead of it being that, it's this terrible feeling that nobody wants me, nobody loves me, nobody cares for me. And you haven't got the intellectual awareness to not absorb the feeling.
No,
so
there's no blocking it.
There's no way of saying, oh, mummy's just in a hard time at the moment. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Inside of your mind, because the mind's not developed at this stage. So it's just getting a barrage of this. And, there's no emotion inside or thought going inside. Oh, daddy's just got a problem with responsibility. There's none of those thoughts that can pass through its mind because its mind's not developed. And so all it's doing is receiving this huge barrage of negative emotions for which it has no other experience to compare with. It only has those emotions. Now, if you can think about it like that, then you start to understand how difficult it is when the child arrives in the spirit world. Whereas a person who has gone through having mum and dad who desires their company, who desires their life at least, even if they know they can't even look after them. Let's say it's a 12-year-old child who's just become pregnant and she knows she can't look at it, but if she at least desires the life of the child to carry it full term and then gives it up for adoption, the child at least has had the experience of my life is honoured at least. At least there's one part, and the mother, in this case the 12-year-old child, has had enough love for this child to carry it full term at least. So for 9 months it's had enough love for the child to actually love it enough to survive that period of time. So that child has a far bigger head start in life than the child who's been aborted and passes in the spirit world. The child who's been aborted passing in the spirit world has just a whole range of very, very difficult emotions of which it's got nothing to compare with, to experience before it has the ability to grow. And as a result of that, it often, its growth is quite stunted in the first part of its life as a result. Whereas the child, even coming onto the earth where there is violence and then onto the earth where there is trauma and problems, at least they experience somebody respecting their life. And at least they experience somebody wanting them to carry them full term at least. Somebody who has enough love for them for them to experience as one of their first experiences love instead of hatred or resentment or rejection. Yeah.
So one of those souls in the spirit world, one of the huge emotions they'd have to feel would be self-worth as well.
Terrible issues of self-worth they have until they've released all of these emotions of rejection and unwantedness. They have far. You know what it's like for the average person on earth with self-worth. Most people on earth have terrible issues of self-worth. Well, these spirits who initially pass have the worst imaginable condition of self-worth that any person on earth could imagine when they first pass.
So would they have to be, this nursing of the nurses, would that have to be a part of observing a desire for failure to thrive? It's a term we used to use in nursing for babies. Would that be an issue for these souls? Failure to thrive.
Yeah, well, because all of the nursing mothers in the spirit world, there are groups of spirits who are expert at taking all of these children. There are many, many billions of these women spirits who are involved in this job. And these spirits are very well versed at how to help the child work through these initial emotions, work through their feelings of low worth, work through their feelings of rejection, not being wanted, work through feelings of nobody having a respect for their life, and all of these other feelings that these children feel. And these women are very, very capable, and men, there are men and women who do this, very capable parents. And what they do is they help the child go through the pain of their initial existence, and then because of their attitudes towards the children do eventually end up with self-worth, and they do end up with, not feeling rejected anymore and all those kind of things, because the children release those emotions. So it's important to understand that the child doesn't remain in that initial condition that it arrives in the spirit world because of the help that it receives. But it's also important to understand that it's not just this process, they've passed and everything's happy for them.
Yeah.
Not at all.
That process, on an average, you mentioned 12 months before?
Well, for the child who has been aborted, let's say a mother took the morning after pill and she was pregnant. For a child aborted using that technique, it might have a week or two of crying to do in the spirit world, that it will have no conscious thought about even knowing why it's crying. It just feels unhappy, and it will cry for a week or two. It has to still go through all of these other issues, but now the nursing mother has the ability to give it the feeling that it's worth something, that it give it the feeling that it's cared for and wanted, give it the feeling, all these feelings that it never got from its parents on earth. And the mother and father in the spirit world, and often it's both both who do this, give it those feelings. And so after a few months of its existence in the spirit world, it starts to feel that it's worth something, and it starts to feel that it's cared for, and it starts to feel that it's wanted. In the case of a child who's been aborted late term, so let's say it's aborted in the fourth month, or some are even aborted much later than that, those type of children have already got large amounts of issues now when they pass in the spirit world. So their grief may last much longer. And when I say much longer, I have seen children still crying a year later in the spirit world, a year of earth time later. You imagine crying for an entire year without any stopping, really. Yeah. That's what it's like for them. So lots of grief to release. And they take longer also to absorb these feelings from the new parents, because they're still connected to the old parents, and as a result of that, they're still connected to the rejection that comes from the old parent, and the parent on earth I'm referring to when I say the old parent, and they're still feeling the feelings of rejection coming from so they've got to actually be taught how to completely disconnect emotionally from the parents on earth, so they no longer absorb the emotions from that parent, and taught how to now start absorbing emotions from parents who care for them. And that process it might have a year of grief, right, full-on grief, and then it might take 3 or 4 or 5 years now for the spirit in the spirit world to help the child completely disconnect from the parents on earth, so that it now can absorb some of these more pleasant emotions from the spirits who care for them.
Is that soul then growing at the same rate it would have grown on earth?
No.
No, not at all.
Because obviously, if the very first experience of a soul is one of rejection, lack of love and so forth, it obviously has a big effect on the soul's ability to grow, and also the body that's attached to the soul. So the spirit body of the child is stunted for a period of time as well, because it has to. The spirits help the child work through the different emotions, and so it's quite difficult for the child as well from a physical perspective in the spirit world, as it is for a spiritual perspective. But again, the nursing parents in the spirit world.
I'm having troubles visualising nursing a little embryo. So have I got it all mixed up? Have I got it wrong?
Well, you're thinking about it from holding it physically.
Yes.
It's more about the emotional connection, the emotions that are going on between the person and the embryo, if you like. And yes, it is a little body, some of it very undeveloped, so quite tiny. And you can't, from a spirit person's perspective, they hold it in they can hold it many times in one hand, in terms of caring for it, but they know how to care for all of its physical needs and all of its emotional needs. And just like, I suppose, how doctors must feel when they have a humic rib baby who's maybe 4 or 3 months prem.
I used to be able to hold them in one hand and make up their bed, and then put them back down.
Yeah. So sometimes they're smaller than the length of one hand, and it's not dissimilar
Okay.
for these spirits in the spirit world when they're caring for these very small beings.
And would these nurses have multiples of souls? That they're
Often they
looking-
do.
Yeah,
They are
okay.
capable of having multiple. That many of the children sleep a lot because they need to sleep a lot to grow, and they still continue to sleep in the spirit world for a fairly long time, particularly if they've been aborted or miscarried. And as a result of that, one person can share the role between many. But there is there's a great amount of love that's given to these children, far more care than anybody on earth could imagine at this point. You have to go there to see it before you understand how much love they receive. Yeah.
Thank you. Would you put miscarriage, stillborns and premature births under the same classification of abortion?
No, because if you look at abortion is a purposeful decision taken by one or both parents to terminate the life of the child. A miscarriage is what I would classify as taking the life of a child but not understanding the reason why.
Okay, yeah.
So many parents who miscarry have no understanding as to what the emotional cause is as to why the miscarriage happened. And in fact, they sort of view it more as like, some even view it as God took her from me. Some view it as a physical problem in their body.
Was it meant to be? Or
some see it, there's all sorts of reasons why miscarriages occur. Each one of the reasons are linked to different emotions. And very few people who have miscarriages look at the emotions associated with the miscarriage. And a lot of times children who are conceived feel heavily oppressed by the emotions of the parents. So, for example, if one emotion that causes a lot of miscarriages is a deep desire in mothers to become a mother. And that might sound a bit strange, but many women on earth do not believe they are a real woman until they become a mother. And so therefore their becoming a real woman is dependent upon them having a child. And because of that, this emotion is projected at the child. And the child's already seeing the role that it has. It's actually helping the mother become a mother. The child is not being loved under those circumstances, it's being selfishly taken from. And there are many other circumstances upon which the unborn child is being selfishly taken from, and it repels the child from the womb so strongly that the child actually can no longer maintain a physical connection between its soul and the physical body. And as soon as the soul can't maintain a connection between the soul and the physical body will terminate. So many parents do not understand the emotions that are causing miscarriages. So I would call that an unwitting abortion in a way. Like it's sort of like there's emotions inside of the parents that they do not understand, and they're unconscious of or ignorant about, that cause the child to miscarry. The key is to address those emotions. If you address those emotions, you will never have another miscarriage. Right? So there are many women who have many miscarriages, and if you address the emotion that causes a miscarriage, you will never have another miscarriage. Some women miscarry boys, and some women miscarry girls as well. And if you know the gender of the child you've miscarried, it will tell you a lot about the emotions and the effect that it has. So, for example, many boys are miscarried because women hate men, for example, and they don't want to bring another man into the world who's just going to be, like the men that they perceive around them. And so they often want to miscarry the male child. For example, ones like Henry VIII, who's renowned, is it Henry VIII?
all of the wives.
Who had all of the wives, many of whom had miscarriages or give birth to girls. A lot of that was caused by the emotion inside of him,
right.
The king himself, and also the emotions of resentment inside of the women towards him as a result of his emotion. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And this caused them to attract girl children or to attract boy children who then miscarried.
Wow.
So I suppose what I'm getting to is there's a lot of different emotions in regard to miscarriage. In regard to a stillbirth, there's another number of different emotions there as well, and a premature birth, there's a number of different emotions there. The key The key is to understand the emotions. Once we understand the emotions and clear them away from the soul, then those events won't occur. So the interesting fact about all of this is that many of the huge amount of resources that goes into keeping children alive after they've been born or dealing with the issues of, those kind of issues can actually be repaired and sorted out by actually dealing with the emotions in the parents. So if the emotions in the parents are addressed, now we can begin to actually have a lot more safe births, a lot more births that are very, very natural without having any complications. Even a complication in a birth is actually caused by certain emotions. And if you can address those particular issues emotionally, we can get to a stage where every woman on the planet gives birth without any complication and without needing any doctor or nurse or any other person around them, just like a cow in the field can give birth in the same manner. Yep.
Thank you. But still on that though, the soul still has to experience all the same pains as for the aborted soul as well?
No, because the aborted soul has the additional pains.
Okay.
So the soul of a miscarried child has different types of pains associated with it, and remember,
but it still has pains.
It still has pains, but every situation is individual. Every situation is unique. So we're trying to generalise situations that are unique here. But let's make some generalisations. The soul that is aborted has to go through the sense of being immediately rejected, of not being wanted, not being loved, having no worth, its life not being respected and so forth. So that's...
Yep.
Now the child who's miscarried, its life is generally respected. So therefore, it doesn't have to go through that emotion. Its life is generally desired. So therefore, it doesn't have to go through that emotion. Its life is it's generally wanted. So it doesn't have to go through that emotion. Does that make sense? But there are other emotions it might have to go through. For example, if it's a male child and the mother has huge amounts of rage towards the male that she has not released, then he's got to go through the emotion of being hated as a boy. Does that make sense? Different set of emotions. Yep. So the child who's miscarried goes through a different set of emotions than the child who's aborted. And the same applies to a stillbirth or to a premature birth and so forth, who dies and so forth.
So there's still pain for them to experience, but it's based on different emotions.
It's based on different emotions, and also it's less directly connected to the attitude of the parent of wanting the child to die.
Yes.
So usually a miscarriage, the parent does not believe they want the child to die, and often they do not want the child to die. In fact, often what they're doing is they're putting roles upon the child before the child's even born, which is part of the problem of a miscarriage. Whereas abortion, the parent wants the child to die.
Yeah.
So there's a whole different set of emotions involved with what the child has to address. And, of course, the parent too, by the way.
Yeah, and both parents.
And both parents. It's always both parents. Yeah. And remember, it's not just both parents' emotions. It's their belief system that also generates a lot of this. So for example, if I've been brought up to believe that a child is not a child until it's in its third month, then of course I'm going to consider abortion between when it's first conceived and up until the beginning of the third month, if that's how I've been brought up to perceive things. And then if the medical profession says all of that to me as well, then I've now got a medical justification, a so-called scientific justification for my decision, which will also have an effect on my decision.
And then the government supports that.
The government supports that, so now the government supports it. I've got also an additional justification for my position. So these are all belief systems that cause me to take the life. And these belief systems all have to be addressed because they are all out of harmony with the life, the gift of life that God's given. Yeah.
Well, we'll go on to the gift then of life and the rights of the unborn.
The rights of the unborn.
So it should be the gifts of the unborn then, I suppose.
Yes, it's interesting how a lot of people see a lot of things as rights when I actually, the way God views them as gifts and the way I see them is as gifts as well. So, for example, many people think, free will is a right. No, free will is a gift that God gave you that can be used. Many people see sex as a right. No, sex is a gift that God gave that you have.
I had a husband who who saw it as his right.
Rape is often the cause of the person who believes sex is a right rather than a gift. So the reality is also love is a gift. It's not a right. Do you understand?
Yes.
So, and in fact, it's the greatest gift that we can ever give somebody is the gift of our love. But it's not a right that they can demand of us to give. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. So me saying then, does the unborn child have rights, gifts, such as the gift to care, the right to protection, and the right to life?
Well, let's look at it from a gift perspective.
Yes, please.
If I loved the unborn child, I would want to give it protection. I would want to give it security. I would want to give it the feeling of my love. I would want to care for it. I would never wish to have some of my emotions or some of my physical actions harm it. So if I really loved my child, I wouldn't necessarily see that as the rights of the child, but I'd see that as something that I desperately wanted to give to the child because of the feeling that I have of loving the child. Also, if I saw the child not as my child, but I saw it as God's child, for whom I am now responsible because I chose to actually conceive this child, then I would also have a far different way of looking at things, wouldn't I? So instead of seeing the child as someone I could boss around and someone I could browbeat into submission and someone I could train to become just like me, I would see the child as something completely different to that. I would see my responsibilities also differently. So instead of seeing the child grow up and become a mini me, I would wish the child to actually fully know itself and fully discover itself. I would also wish the child to fully discover how to love and how to use its free will in a manner that was in harmony with love rather than out of harmony with love. And I would therefore show the child that there is consequences for the use of its will out of harmony with love. So the child can be taught many things through this process, and I can also learn many things through the process. And most parents know that they learn probably more initially, in particular, than the child learns in the first few years of the child's life. And also the parent can learn about what unconditional love really is. Like when a child's screaming, and you still have to love the child and care for the child, you start to learn how what unconditional love really means to a large extent. And so I sort of see the relationship between parent and child more as a relationship between custodian and the child, because the parent is God, and all we have is custody of the child until such a time as the child is self-sufficient. And we have the responsibility to help it understand principles such as the principle of life, the principle of love, the principles of, the gifts, these gifts that we have, the gift of free will, the gift of life, the gift of love. And so as a parent, we would then make a choice to automatically offer the child those gifts. Because
even the unborn child.
Even the unborn child, yes. And in fact, more so the unborn child than the born child, I feel, because the unborn child is more sensitive emotionally to these gifts than the born child is. And the reason why is because it's actually sitting inside of the emotional soup of its own mother, right in the womb.
And that it is a soup sometimes.
And as close as it could possibly get, inside of someone is as close as you can get to somebody, and the child is sitting as close as it can get to the mother in particular, and potentially the father. But during that time, it's essential the child receives these basic gifts from the mother. But I wouldn't call them rights. I would actually call them gifts that we have the potential to give the child. Now, of course, God designed the system so that we would want to give those gifts. But unfortunately, many of us have become a bit distorted in our own natures, and we've walked away a bit from God, but we've also, when I say a bit, that's probably under-exaggerated, we've walked away a lot from God, and we've also walked away a lot from love, and so we've become quite selfish, self-absorbed as a human race, and as a result of that, we don't respect these gifts that God has given us, and therefore we don't respect that God has given those same gifts to the little developing child inside of us.
So do these gifts become active immediately, or at what stage do they come in? At the same stage the soul comes in?
Yes, as soon as the soul comes in, it has the ability to experience these gifts. So if the parents love the child from the moment of conception and want the child, then the child feels tremendously loved and cared for and wanted while it's in that condition. It finds it very difficult to absorb unhappy emotions while it's loved so much and wanted so much. Even if the parent has an unhappy emotion, the child just still feels wanted and loved and cared for itself. It can observe its mother cry without absorbing its mother's sadness because it still feels loved by the mother. But when the mother or the father go into fear or anger or other emotions like that, now it's not absorbing those particular feelings, and now it's absorbing a completely different set of feelings. And this is why it's so important for parents to develop enough where they can consistently give the feeling of love to their child. If it doesn't happen consistently, then the child experiences grief. So every time the mother becomes afraid or angry, or the father becomes afraid or angry, now the child is experiencing the emotion of grief, the withdrawal of love.
Wow. Can we talk about the afterlife of the aborted child a bit more? You have touched a fair bit on it. I've got a whole pile of questions here, but I might not ask them all because you've given a fair bit of detail already. But so we already know where the little souls go and who takes them. One question on that: an aborted child or a miscarried child or a prem baby, they can never become earthbound? They will always go to the spirit world?
It's very rare for an aborted child to become earthbound. The reason why is it's already being rejected, and of course it's going to go where love is rather than getting the rejection. Very, very hard for such a child to ever become earthbound. And in fact, I've never observed an aborted child who's become earthbound.
Would that be because it doesn't understand free will?
No, it's because it feels no attraction to its mother because of the rejection from its mother and father. It receives no attraction to its mother or father. If the mother aborted the child and the father wanted it, then the aborted child would feel a connection to the father, but not to the mother. But that being said, it won't be earthbound because the spirit in the spirit world will give it most of its love and most of its care. So very, very rare. I've never seen. I'm not saying that it's not possible, but I've never seen an aborted child be earthbound. There are many miscarried children that are earthbound because of some connection emotionally to the parent who constantly thinks of them. And it's particularly the case when mothers grieve their miscarriage for long periods of time. When the mother grieves the miscarriage for long periods of time, a lot of mothers don't realise they're actually drawing the child back to them every time they grieve for them. And it's very difficult sometimes for the nursing parent in the spirit world to actually... nursing parent in the spirit world can't keep a hold of the child. It will be drawn back to the mother on earth. So what often happens is the nursing parent in the spirit world then tries to assist the mother to work through her grief about the miscarriage in an appropriate way, not in a selfish way. A lot of mothers grieve miscarriages for incorrect reasons. When I say incorrect reasons, a lot of times the grief is associated with the selfishness inside of them rather than actually grief for the child. In other words, they're grieving their own life rather than grieving for the child. And a lot of times they're grieving their own life because what a pregnancy or what a birth would mean to them. Does that make sense to you? So for many mothers, the birth means that they're now a mother.
Well, which probably caused the miscarriage in the first place.
Often it can cause the miscarriage in the first place. So they now believe they're now a mother. So when the miscarriage occurs, they're now grieving that they've missed out on this opportunity to be a mother. And often they have a lot of unworthy feelings that they need to work through of their own related to that have no relationship to the child itself, but have every relationship to what they believe the child's role would be. And so oftentimes mothers are grieving not about the child itself or the loss of, the potential connection with the child. Because the reality is there is no loss of that potential connection. This child has the ability to come and visit you whenever you want. And also a lot of mothers don't realise that in a sleep state they have the ability to play with their child whenever they want and to be with their child. In fact, many mothers take full responsibility of the care of their child while they're asleep. So it's only when they come to earth that they can't feel the child around them. And so many mothers are feeling the grief of that. So many of the mothers don't realise they're actually still got a child, and because of their belief about death being final and certain and so forth, they feel they've lost the child. But in the sleep state, they know they've still got the child, and the child still interacts with them, and they still nurse the child, and everything happens in the sleep state. And they only remember that once they go to the spirit world and remember the whole experience many times.
So a lot of their grief can be based on that loss of that feeling when they come back from a sleep.
Yes, a lot of their grief is associated with that, but most of our grief in the end is to do with emotions inside of ourselves that are quite self-absorbed. But we need to feel it. We need to go through the process of feeling it. But sometimes we create emotions within us that are not the real emotions we need to feel. So, for example, the mother who's grieving her miscarried child is often grieving for the loss of the child without realising that what she really needs to grieve is why she had so much demands upon this child that the child felt repulsed and therefore couldn't live in the womb anymore. So she needs to feel those emotions, and yet they're not the emotions that often they're felt. And so the mother gets pregnant again, has another miscarriage, and often you have mothers that have a series of miscarriages as a result of their emotions. Sometimes some of this grief, fortunately, comes up in the mother after each miscarriage, and eventually the mother can hold the child full term because she's dealt with enough grief and enough demand to actually no longer have the demands on the child where the child feels repelled. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
That's going to be fairly controversial for many of our dear sisters on the planet who believe that miscarriages are caused by some other thing.
And I think I was feeling a lot of emotions about that when you were just explaining that.
Yeah.
It's quite sad, really.
It is quite sad, but the key for us to remember is that if we can know the cause of anything, we can solve it.
Yeah.
And this is something that all people need to remember about every problem. If you know the cause of why somebody murdered, you can solve it. You can actually help the person correct emotionally the cause. The same applies to an abortion. If you know the cause of why a mother chose an abortion, then you can solve it so that there are no more abortions that occur. If you know the cause of a miscarriage, you can also solve it, and therefore no more miscarriages would occur, and there'd be all this there'd be less amount of grief on the planet as a result. And this is the beauty of knowing the truth. So what I would encourage mothers to do, and fathers to remember, because this is also involving the father's emotions, not just the mother's. So it is possible for a mother to have a miscarriage because of the father's emotions, right?
It's usually, from my experience, the mother who grieves the most, though, unless the male's in denial.
Yeah.
Yeah, suppresses it more.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So there is often in a woman this, and the reason why women develop too soon nowadays too is because of this same emotion, emotion that they've got to be a mother before they can actually be a woman, and it's a very deep belief in most females on the planet that they've got to be a mother before they're a real woman, and in fact many mothers project that at women who have never been mother as well. Oh, you've never been a mother, so what would you know? You know, like that kind of emotion.
Well, it was like having, when I had my son, it's like there's suddenly this secret society that appears that, didn't appear until you actually gave birth.
Exactly, which is all part of this problem, actually. Yeah, it's all part of this problem. And this is a lot about the separation of the genders, the actual disharmony, the unloving emotions that exist between males and females on the planet cause a lot of these particular things too. So the cause of these issues are not simple, they're quite complex emotionally. But we need to understand that the beauty of knowing the cause rather than judging the cause. There's a difference between knowing the cause and judging the cause. If I know the cause without judging the cause, I now have an ability to fix the cause. And so the case with miscarriage, if I know the cause without judging the cause, even judging myself, if I'm the mother who's miscarried, if I stop judging myself and I know the cause, I now have the ability to emotionally work my way through that cause to such an extent that I can address the issue emotionally. So I've known women on the planet who have had a miscarriage, which I would actually term as an abortion. They had no desire to carry the child. They just wouldn't go and do the physical act of an abortion. And so what they did is they actually had a feeling in their body that they wanted their body to expel the child, and it did. I also know many women who have had miscarriages who have felt overwhelming grief at having a miscarriage, that they still can't really understand. Does that make sense? Like, they still don't really get why it's so overwhelming, because they've never met the child yet. Is it the feeling they had? If we could turn off that.
It's my phone.
It's your phone, is it?
Sorry. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. And does that make sense, so, Barb?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
I was feeling in that interaction there the emotion of the mother's grief, of the selfishness of that.
Yep.
Because the child has moved on in most cases and is well looked after, but the mother's grief, and I was feeling, because my terminations were all about selfish reasons, and this miscarriage was also selfish reasons.
Yeah,
so I was feeling the grief about that.
Yeah, a lot of times miscarriage is very selfish reasons, and remember, it can be selfish reasons of either parent.
Yeah.
Not just one of the parents. So it can be the selfish reasons in the male.
The male might want to have a male son, at long last.
And the mother might feel that, he's going to reject her if I have a girl, and he's going like, I hate, why would I want a woman, and another woman in my life, and he's got all these angry-based emotions towards the mother, and also therefore the child. If she's a girl child, she's automatically feeling this. And so she then goes into this state where she's now terribly afraid of what's going to happen to her in her life with this father, right? And so, for that reason, finishes up not being able to maintain, because of the terrible fear she experiences, the unborn child. She can't maintain a connection between herself and her own body anymore, and it just severs. And once it severs, then... But it's mostly the parent's emotion that severs the connection. So
I was, as you know, I was born, but I was the fifth daughter, and I felt upon my birth a lot of... my mother knew I was a girl. She knew instantly that I was a girl.
So she was able to feel her pregnancy?
She was.
Able to feel the little soul connected, which is lovely.
Yes, and she knew it was a girl, and she was in total fear of it being the girl.
Yeah.
And I remember being born now, I feel it, of having that fear of being a female. Because my father wanted a son.
A son.
Yeah.
And this was really your mother's fear about that she's not a good wife if she gives birth to another daughter.
Yes.
And many women have had that emotion through history, as you can imagine, where men have projected huge, terrible emotions towards women about what kind of gender they want their child to be. And, most of the men are terrible, like these men are often primarily responsible from a soul perspective for the miscarriages of their children. So we need to always consider that it's not just the mother. Too many men go into this when we discuss abortion. Too many men, almost go, or even discuss miscarriage. Too many men go, it's not my problem. My wife miscarried. No, you need to look at yourself, fellas. You need to look at yourself and examine yourself, because it's not just your wife's emotions that are the reason for this particular event occurring.
But us women don't look at the male's part of it many a times either.
Of course, because many...
We can be conditioned, I suppose.
Well, because many women have this viewpoint, I'm the mother. I've got a bit more important role as well, which is part of the problem, can you see?
Yeah.
So we have all these emotional injuries about, like many mothers have emotional injuries about being a mother, and for some women it's the only thing that really brings joy to their life. And so, of course, they're going to have a great degree of ownership, which is out of harmony with love as well. So there are so many emotions involved with the whole process of becoming pregnant and conceiving a child, and also then bringing it to full term and giving birth to it, and even bringing up a child. There's all sorts of emotions that get imposed upon the children that we could release as parents, and therefore have much more sound, emotionally stable and physically capable children that we currently do have.
What time frame, on an average, would an aborted soul take to become at one with God?
Well, it's very, very different. While most of the nursing people in the spirit world are at one with God,
Yep, so they're celestial.
most of them are celestial spirits who nurse them. Not all of them, but many of them are, or they are on that path. The reality is they don't force ever the child to make the choice to desire God. And so what often happens is the child is educated through their desires. So as a child builds their desires to know truth, then the surrogate parent in the spirit world actually educates them with the truth about what the child desires to know. So if the child never desires to know about God, then of course the parent never educates the child about God. Does that make sense? Everything is based on desire and passion of the child. So what they try to do in the spirit world is they do discuss God, of course, as a concept, just like you would discuss God probably on earth as a concept. But they allow the child's inquisitive nature to determine the course of all discussions. This is something that's very different on earth. See, on earth it's usually the adult's forced nature that forces the communication on the child, whereas in the spirit world what happens is the child's inquisitive nature generates the discussion. So, and what they do is they create the environment around the child to encourage inquisitive nature. So what they do is they, instead of creating a very bland, it's a bit like a parent nowadays. You see many parents nowadays, have moving things in the nursery of their child, and they do that so that the child wants to grab them, and so it's now developing physical sensation of touch and having coordination and all these other things that it would not normally do if those moving things weren't present. And so it's very similar in a way in the spirit world, but far more developed. So where there's literally hundreds of thousands of different things in the child's environment that are created, so the child wants to know why, or the child wants to ask the question. And so what happens is the spirits design the environment specifically so that the child can ask questions about anything, including questions about God. But they wait for the child to express that desire rather than forcing it upon the child, enforcing the knowledge upon the child. For that reason, many children don't ever find, some of them don't find the divine love path for many years, and sometimes even hundreds of years after they've been aborted or miscarried. And the reason for that is that they've desired to follow the intellectual path that many people follow on earth, and they're now often in the sixth dimension of the spirit world, in the sixth sphere of the spirit world, what you would play in a perfect place of natural love, still being very inquisitive about creation, but not asking many Christians about how that creation got there. And so it's like it's like the same as anybody else then, basically, is what I'm saying. Yeah. So just like on earth, there are many people who never ask those questions about how creation got there and all those kind of things, and they want a physical resolution to spiritual problems and issues. It's the same in the spirit world after the child has got through its hurt of being aborted, or it got through some of the pain of its miscarriage. Yeah.
When the child gets through that pain, does it have a desire to connect with its parents, or would it be based on a longing for the parents on earth's longing?
Yes, it's
solely?
Always based solely on the longing or the love that comes from the parents. So let's say a mother who aborted a child when she was young, she was told all these stories, or she just believed what her partner said to her and things like that. And then when she was in her late 20s, she started wanting to have a child. And then she realised that she aborted a child, and she felt some grief about that, so she cried about that. And she cried about the fact that, her partner at the time forced her into it, and cried about her willingness to terminate just because of the relationship she probably now doesn't have. And she dealt with a lot of that, and she had a longing to know this child, and if she was aware that the child existed and had a longing for the child would come straight to her. And in fact, many people who've discussed this issue of abortion with me have since met their aborted children and entered into a relationship with them, that they can feel the aborted child around them and enjoy the company of that child, and they know that they spend time with them in the spirit world when they're asleep. And so, they've entered a relationship again. In practice, what happens most of the time is because most people are wanting to remain totally unaware of an abortion, totally in denial of the effects of it, totally in denial of, anything about the abortion. And most people on earth, and many people in Western society in particular, have no concept that an aborted child is actually living still. As a result of that, they don't imagine that they can have a relationship with them. Yeah. And so therefore they only discover them for the first time, many of them, in the spirit world after they've been educated about those matters. The parent, I mean.
And so in the spirit world, and the parent's educated about those matters, the parent still has to have the desire before the child will come. It stays the same.
And it has to be a pure desire. It can't be one based on, selfish reasons or anything like that.
Yep.
So many of the women who have had abortions and who have had miscarriages when they pass in the spirit world do meet up with their children and do work through the emotional reasons why they've done it. Less of the men do it more frequently. And that's why many of the men remain longer in the dark conditions caused by... So if I can illustrate, when I, as a male, have forced or tried to force my partner into an abortion and she's taken that action, I bear a large degree of the responsibility of the abortion. When I pass in the spirit world, no matter how good my life has been elsewhere, I would still be treated like I've been the murderer of the child. And therefore, I have to work through that issue. Now, many men are in so severe denial of that issue that they spend many, many years trying to work out why they're still where they are in the spirit world before they realise that it has something to do with them forcing their wife or partner or one night stand into having an abortion. And so then they generally go through the same process as the women. But many of the women feel a bit more connected to it, of course, because being a woman, you carry the child inside of you. So therefore, it's much more difficult to be in a large amount of denial about the issue when you pass. Yeah. But for the man, you can be in a large amount of denial for a much longer period.
So for a male, they could have repented on lots of things in life, but so totally disconnected from that, and that's what's keeping them in the dark place. That one thing.
That one thing. Yeah. And many of them take, tens or hundreds of years to work through the issue. Slowly, they realise, and then they have these realisations of, I did that. I forced my wife to have an abortion. And if I hadn't have done that, she probably wouldn't have had the abortion. And it was only her fear of losing me that caused her to have the abortion. And, then he'd have a lot of grief about the fact that he'd forced his wife to do something that was against her own will, really, just for the sake of him. And he had to have some kind of recollection of the selfishness of that act. And then he would actually be in a repentant phase and then progress spiritually in the spirit world, progress to another dimension in the spirit world. So he'd go maybe from the hells in the first sphere to a higher first sphere condition by having these realisations. Many men don't realise that that's one of the main reasons why they don't progress, is that they sort of almost view the abortion as the wife's responsibility.
Well, I hope many of those men are here today. Soul damage.
Yes.
Damage caused to parents' souls who have aborted a child vary in degree due to the circumstances at the time?
To a degree, Barbara. We need to understand, we've talked about the soul damage to the child.
Yeah.
So if you can imagine, the soul damage to the child is quite intense. Now the parent, it depends on what type of, how the parent actually works through the issue of repentance. If the parent is not sorry for what they have done, then the law of compensation begins working upon the parent's soul immediately, as soon as they've committed the abortion. As a result, their soul is automatically in the state of a murderer in the spirit world. If they passed that point in time, they would pass into a very similar location to what a murderer would pass into. And in fact, many people don't realise that many of the justifications for abortions are very, very similar to the justifications that a murderer has about murdering. And if they started seeing the correlation, they'd realise what's going on. You see, many murderers take the act for the sake of other people. Many murderers take the act, do a murder for the sake of influence from others, like spirits and other people on earth. Many murderers take the act because I'm a white person, so I can murder a black person. because he's less than me. So many murderers take that action, a justification based on a belief, which is exactly the same as what an abortion is, a justification based on a belief. So if many people in the spirit world and people on earth need to see that much of the justification for abortion is actually very, very similar to many of the justifications that a murderer internally has for murdering. The only difference is, because of the belief systems, we accept the abortion, usually society, particularly Western society, accepts the abortion as not being murder when they don't accept the murder as not being murder. They say that is murder. Now, from God's perspective, the law is consistent right across the board. So if I choose to take the life of another person, it doesn't matter whether that person's just been conceived or 80 years old or anywhere in between. If I choose to take the life of the person, then I bear some culpability for that decision. There is a soul-based reason within me. And the soul-based reason within me is a lack of respect for life, a lack of respect for the person's own choices, and a number of other things. And for every person it's different. The reasons or the justifications for it are different. So for example, some people would never, ever accept an abortion, except if they had been raped by a black man and she was white, then they would consider an abortion. Right? Now, if that is the reason why, then she's obviously got issues of racism that she needs to work her way through, you see, and issues of what the stigma of that would be, and so forth. Others only see it as a condition of rape, so they would never consider an abortion, but if they've been raped, they would definitely want to abort the child. So there's issues of whether the issues of the child's life. The child is not responsible for the rapist's actions. And unfortunately, many times we see the two as being connected, but the child is not responsible for the rapist's actions. So even if it would be better off carrying the child to full term and giving the child to a couple who want to love that child, if we're challenged by loving the child ourselves. And I know of many people who've been raped on earth who have still loved the child. But if we don't feel we're capable of that, we're better off giving the child to another couple than we would be to abort the child and have the child go through all these really hard experiences, as well as the hard experience of being rejected. Does that make sense? So if we understood the full situation, we would generally make different decisions and choices. But it does damage the condition of both parents, and it depends on who was primarily responsible. So if the father forced the mother to have the abortion, and in fact, historically, sometimes the mother was tied down and had a forced abortion, then the father would bear total responsibility for that abortion. Total responsibility. The mother would bear none whatsoever. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then from that range, you've got right the way through to the mother deciding to have an abortion without the father's involvement.
Or knowing.
Or knowing, even. And so now, if you think about all the different emotions involved, we go from one extreme of the emotions is the father knowing and forcing the mother through force and violence to have the abortion, right the way through to the mother knowing and not the father knowing at all, and she has an abortion. In between that, you can imagine there is a large amount of different emotional injuries in between those two extremes of scale. And as a result, those emotional injuries cause us to take an action which darken our soul further. And those emotional injuries are present within our soul, but also the action now, which is different to just the thought of the action. So we might consider an abortion but then decide against it. That's not the same as having the abortion. And if you have the abortion, you've now taken an action which has forcibly removed someone from their life experience on earth. And there is quite severe consequences to that in the sense of our own soul, in terms of the darkening of our own soul, the lack of love in our own soul that would cause such a condition. So we need to work through those particular consequences with regard to love. Yeah.
Thank you.
But the key is to not view it as a... we need to stop viewing it too as a permanent condition. You know, we can work through those consequences. We don't have to judge ourselves. We can just go, okay, this is what I did. I can work through the reasons why I did it. I can actually work through it so much that I'll never consider doing it again, under any circumstances, if I work through all the issues.
And that's full repentance.
And that's full repentance, yeah.
We'll come to repentance in a minute then. So free will in all of this, does a parent's free will come into play? You know, there's always that, well, what about the woman's rights? You know, surely she's got a right to decide this, or surely we've all got rights to make these decisions.
Yeah, well,
free will.
Let's again address the issue of rights. Remember, free will is not a right, it's a gift.
Yeah, and when you look at the word rights, it's got such hardness to it, and you
And
look at the
anger to
word
it.
and you look at the word gift. It's
It's got such generosity to it. Yes.
and softness and
softness,
generosity.
yeah.
Good word, a good
Yes.
word. Yeah.
Now, this coming weekend, I'm giving a talk about free will, and so I'll address a lot of the issues about free will and the gift of free will, not the right
rights.
of free will or the law of free will. It'll be the gift of free will.
Right.
And if we understand that everyone has a gift of free will, then we would understand that our child has been given that gift to the same extent that we have. And if there was any sense of equality within the mother, she would recognise that she does not have the right to take away the gift of free will from another person, which is what she's doing.
So we're using the term right in the wrong
Exactly.
in the wrong part of the sentence.
Yes, yeah. So the reality is, if I loved the child, I would recognise that it's been given the gift of life by my parent. My parent. So if I loved my child, I'd be recognised that it's been given the gift of life not by me. I don't have the right to decide for the child, because my parent, God, gave the life. And therefore, the gift of life wasn't mine to either give or take away. I was not able to give or take away this gift of life. And if I take it away forcibly, then I am automatically saying to the person who gave that gift of life that I have the right to take away your right to give the gift of whoever you want. And the reality is there are quite severe consequences in that. That is, that's why murdering is quite a severe consequence on the human soul, because we've actually taken away this gift that God has given to a person that we don't even personally have the ability to give. That's the interesting thing. We have no idea how conception happens. Most scientists still have no idea how. Well, of course, in the spirit world we have ideas, but on Earth, mankind has no idea really how conception happens and the marvel of it all. We describe it and everything, but there's no real idea about the marvel of it all. And yet we see it as and often we even call it that, the gift of life. And yet we are perfectly able to take away somebody else's gift of life. And that indicates that there is quite a large degree of self-justification or selfishness in that act.
By you explaining that way, I can really feel the severity of that. Like it's huge.
Yeah.
In comparison to some other things.
Very big. Yeah. I have no right to take away the gift of life from another person, just as I have no right to take away the gift of free will from another person. And I have no right to take away anything from another person. In fact, anything that they don't want to give, I have no right. Yeah.
Well, I look forward to that talk this weekend.
No worries.
Soul attachment.
Yeah.
Fathers from the Christian religion, St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas, followed Aristotle's argument and decreed that the fetus acquired the soul after 40 days for males and after 90 days for females.
Convenient, eh?
Now, I'm not sure why males acquire a soul before females.
Well, I can tell you exactly why.
Okay, and I find the concept really funny.
Yeah, it's not true, of course. But
yeah. So, would you like to comment on that then?
Yeah, well, obviously these men, were both types of men, both Aristotle and also these men in the Dark Ages who were part of the church, so-called Church Holy Fathers. They were all living in a male-dominated society. So they were basically always justifying the position of the male in compared to the position of the female. They were always justifying different perspectives about both the male and the female. And in fact, if they knew medically what happened to the development of the child in the womb, they would have had very, very different opinions. But because they were driven by this underlying emotion that men are better than women, and men have more value than women in God's eyes, they then came up with these justifications of when a girl child becomes a fetus or a growing a person, as to when a boy child becomes a person. And it's just an indication, really, in a lot of ways, of how poorly developed a lot of men have been in the past, even religious men have been in the past, thinking in their arrogance that they would be somehow treated differently by God than a female. The reality is that both genders are treated equally and as of equal importance by God. And in fact, once the human race starts to realise that, there'll be tremendously more changes than currently there are on the earth, even that would reflect that condition.
Wow.
It's a pretty condescending viewpoint towards women, and
it's
also
a viewpoint that still exists today.
I agree, but it's highly inaccurate. But it's also very condescending, and it has no understanding of God actually in it.
Yeah.
These so-called religious men had no understanding of God when it came to women. And as a result of that, they perpetrated a lot of lies about women, and it's no wonder that many women find religion quite abhorrent nowadays as a result of these lies that have been perpetrated about them, and their lesser connection with God that has always been the innuendo of these religious leaders. The reality is women can be just as connected to God as any male, and often are more connected with God than any male as a result of some of these male-based injuries.
See, there's 50 days difference there,
Yes.
A lot can happen in 50 days.
Yeah, that's right. It gives them a justification to terminate a few more women, doesn't it?
Well, I
When you think about it.
didn't look at it that way, no.
Because it's basically saying that a male is not a child until 40 days in.
Yeah.
So it's basically saying in the first 40 days you can terminate the male.
Yeah.
But if it's 90 days, you can terminate the female.
Yeah.
Like that's a pretty poor. If you think about the subsequent results of such unloving theories, it just causes like the death of a lot of people, of which they have to bear some responsibility.
We have talked a fair bit about the soul already, but one question on the soul there. Once the soul's attached and it's aborted, can that soul attach to another body?
No.
For an experience? So it only has a once a lifetime chance?
Yes. The reason why God created the incarnation process is at the time of incarnation, we become self-aware. The whole purpose of the incarnation process, there's only one primary purpose of the incarnation process, and that is for the individual person who is unaware in the spirit world to be split into its two halves and then go through a process of growth and awareness. And once the incarnation process has completed, it has a spirit body attached to it. Once a spirit body is attached to it, it can continue the process of self-awareness even if it doesn't exist on earth. So for that reason, any child that is aborted does not need to come back to earth to continue the process of self-awareness, to continue the process of its own incarnation. Or you could say to continue the process of becoming aware of itself. Yep.
I obviously, to ease my mind a bit, I thought, well, if you aborted a child and there was a soul attached, this is what I'd tell myself in the early days, that, he could say, no, she's going to abort me, I'm going to hop over here, you know?
It's a great justification for the reincarnation process, isn't it?
It is.
And reincarnation, unfortunately, justifies many unloving actions and many people, and this is one, I feel, sad thing about the reincarnation teachings, is the reincarnation teachings justify the poor treatment of people on earth in a lot of areas, including the poor treatment of aborted, of the unborn. So unfortunately, reincarnation justifies abortion to a degree by saying that the child now has the ability to connect to another body. The reincarnation justifies things like, being treated as a lower class of persons, such as in India, the untouchable class of persons who reincarnation justifies that through this process of saying, they must have done bad things in their previous life, so now we can treat them badly in this life now because You know, their previous existence justifies our treatment of them in this life negatively. And so reincarnation in itself, if people analyse the teachings of reincarnation in terms of love, they would soon see that reincarnation can't be actually a true teaching because it justifies many unloving behaviours.
Thank you. Okay. We just talked about that. Let's go into repentance, I know it's a favourite topic of yours, and I've listened to you talk about repentance a few times. So I've got a few questions here on it. If we need to become repentant for actions, why don't we already at a soul level know that it was wrong? Or are we just in denial? That's why we're just so disconnected. That's why
See, a lot of times if we were given an upbringing of love, we would already know what is right and wrong before even being told. The beauty of having an upbringing that's completely in harmony with all of the laws of love is that you would automatically, instantly know whenever an action was taken out of harmony with love. The unfortunate thing is, though, on this planet at the moment, is we're being brought up in an environment that doesn't understand love. So now we automatically have distortions about what is loving and what isn't, that we then accept as belief systems, and we automatically detune from our emotional state as well to a large degree. So we're automatically shutting down how we felt about a certain thing. If you ask most women about an abortion and how they actually felt, most women say that they felt some degree of distress during the act of deciding to have an abortion, right? But it's rare, in fact, for women to actually say, no, I had no emotion about it and I was fine. You know, there was always some kind of emotional response generally that they had to it. This is the reason why they go through that initial turmoil before they have the abortion. And so their conscience is already working, telling them that they don't feel settled with it. And what happens, though, is that we have come up with a heap of intellectual arguments that cause us to feel settled. So in other words, what the intellectual argument does is it causes us to dismiss this, to dismiss that, to dismiss this feeling, to dismiss that feeling, to dismiss this feeling, to dismiss that feeling. What about the feeling that I could feel the child? I'll dismiss that child. That's impossible. You know, and we dismiss all of these feelings. So what do we end up with? An intellectual argument. And the intellectual argument is always going to be in favour of the justification of an act that's unloving when I want it to be that justification. And so I will use my intellect to justify my unloving acts because that's the direction I want to go. And unfortunately, because I've done that, I've now taken an action that has a severe consequence both on my own soul and the soul of others. And in this case, one potential other, or even more than one if there was a twins or triplets or something like that inside the womb. And that's where, so I suppose in answer to your question is, yes, at the soul level, we are completely able to be sensitive and aware to love and sensitive and aware to every time the principles of love are broken. However, because we often have selfish desires and motivations, and we've been brought up in a society that has selfish desires and motivations, what we finish up doing instead of that is we take actions that are justified by intellect with no connection to the emotions of love. And that's why we finish up taking the actions we take.
And that totally explains my actions, I feel.
If any person who sincerely looks at this issue of abortion, when they look at what I've just said about those kind of things, they will be able to trace back all of these justifications, all of these feelings they had, all of these justifications, all of these things that made them feel okay about the feelings they actually had that were distressing, to the point where they made the decision. And we have a lot of internal justifications and external justifications. You know, when I say external, you know, the medical system, our husband or our partner making the justification, society making a justification. In China, there's the justification that we can't have too many people, and that's another justification. So you know, there's justification after justification that are taken that are all intellectually based, none of them connected to emotion, none of them connected to love. And these justifications cause us to finish up taking an action that's quite harmful to both the child and to the persons who have made that choice.
So then how do we as parents, both both parents, get to the stage of grief and remorse, and feel the repentance, get to a stage of repentance fully for something that we've done, usually a long time ago as well.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, sometimes
you
it can
know,
be 20, 30, 40 years ago,
Yeah.
often. Well, usually there are steps to repentance. Usually, unfortunately, whenever a person is told the truth about something, the initial response is anger. So there will be many people who listen to this interview who then feel quite angry towards me about this issue of, abortion or so forth. And even angry about the issue of miscarriage too, because what I've said is quite confronting about that issue. And unfortunately, as their anger is an indication that they are hiding some fears inside of themselves, and also there's some grief that's underneath their fears. So what most people do when they go through this process is they first feel anger. And it depends how long they want to hold on to this anger as to how long they'll get to the next step. And the next step generally is fear. Fear about that it's right. Fear of the truth, if you like. That, it's right. Why do we fear the truth? Because if it's true, then we've got a lot of crying to do. We've got a lot of grieving to connect to, And so what we eventually do is we connect to the grief. But we connect not to the grief of necessarily just taking the action, but we need to also connect to the grief of why we took the action. And that in itself is quite a complex issue, as we've already discussed. So why a man takes a specific action will be completely different than why a woman might take the action. And in every couple, the reasons are completely different to each other. Does that make sense? So if we were truly repentant, we would allow the resolution of these particular issues that we have inside of ourselves. Does that make sense? We would go through the process of looking at the causal emotional reasons why we took the action.
Do you want to give an example then? So
can I use your example? Is that possible?
Yes, you
so
can.
Your first abortion,
Yeah.
your husband didn't want the child.
No. We actually weren't married at the time.
You weren't married?
And I was 16, 17.
So can you see all of a sudden the justifications popping up?
Yeah.
I'm young.
Yeah.
I don't feel I can cope with bringing up this child, particularly alone.
Yeah.
I wasn't married, so
Yep.
there's the stigma of not being married and having a child. Then there's also the issue that my husband, or my partner, the husband-to-be, did not want the child either, because he felt challenged through his emotional responsibilities and all those things, monetarily, financially, and all sorts of things.
And I'm sure my father comes into there somewhere.
Okay, definitely will come into there somewhere. And so when you start adding it all up, you can see it's quite easy to write down all the reasons why you did it.
Right.
Can you see?
Yeah.
So what I would do if I was a mother or father who's been involved in one is I would write down all the reasons why I was what my true feelings were, what I really wanted, what I was afraid of, what I was angry about, and and why I finished up making the final choice. Every single reason I write down, there is usually some emotion connected to, related to my childhood, to my belief systems, to my religious upbringing, or some other reason. And I need to work my way through them and find the truth to them all. Like what is truthful and loving, instead of why did I justify it? And once I do that, once I recognise the truth about every one of those issues, I will grieve the unloving position, and I'll work through the reasons why I did what I did. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Once I work through the reasons I've done what I've done, now I've cleared away from my soul the underlying the reasons why I did it, and I have a feeling of remorse for having done it. I will probably at that point also want to or wish to connect to my child as well, so I won't avoid the connection to my child. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, when I've
Can I just pause for a while?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so let's start again.
Yeah. The justification of the abortion, and every time I get to the stage where I'm feeling some grief and emotion about it, I get shown pictures that they're happy, they're good, there's no big deal.
Yes.
So it takes me out of that emotion every time.
What's happening is you have surrounding you a group of spirits, women spirits, who have also had abortions, who want you to just be happy, right? And they want you to avoid the grief of the abortion itself. So every time you go into the grief about the abortion and you will start working your way through an issue, all they want to do is show you a pretty picture.
Yes.
And it is true that your children are now very, very happy and they're very content, so it is a true picture of how they currently are, but the spirits doing it with you are only doing it to help you get out of the emotion, which is not a very unloving action. And they are doing that because they don't want to feel the same emotion that you're currently connecting to. Does that make sense?
You mean that's not a very loving action on their part?
It's not a loving action on their
Yeah,
part
yeah.
to want to help you get out of the emotion of dealing with the effects of the abortion. But they also need to go through the same emotion, and they don't want to. And so they feel like extra motivation to just give you a pretty picture and help you get out
So
of
if
the
I
emotion.
persevered with that and prayed and connected and persevered
And
with
speak
that,
with those spirits that
it
are
would
giving
help
you the
them.
picture. Yeah, talk to them about, okay, while you think you're doing the right thing, the reality is, as we've discussed, my child felt all this pain, my child felt pain, a significant amount of pain for a long period of time, I'm responsible for that. I need to be sorry for that. You know, you can talk to the spirits with them. And you need to be sorry for the fact that you did the same thing to your children, and you need to have a degree of responsibility for that as well. And the reason why you are where you are, you know, those spirits, is because they are not yet letting themselves feel the grief. In fact, these are earthbound spirits who just cycle the earth, telling women, they go around the earth, connecting to women who have had abortions who feel bad about it, and they try to make the woman feel good about it. That's all they do. And all they're trying to do really is trying to make themselves feel good about their own abortions that they've committed, right? If they chose to take a different action, they would do a very different thing. A celestial spirit guide will not assist you to avoid an emotion. They will not give you pretty pictures while you're going through an emotion. They might give you one afterwards, but not during. Does that make sense? So they might come and reassure you afterwards that, no, everything's fine now and the child's fine and you can meet them if you want and all those kind of things, but they will not reassure you of it beforehand, before you go through the emotion. These are darker spirits who have yet to even enter the spirit world. They're earthbound, who want to avoid their own responsibility for their own actions, and so they want to avoid they want to help you avoid the responsibility for your actions too. I find it very interesting in New Age circles that many women have been given these pictures as a justification for their abortion, and it actually even encourages those same women to have future abortions, which is very sad when you think about it in terms of what these spirits are trying to accomplish. So these women spirits.
So they're even their actions can encourage you to continue having abortions.
Yes, of course. So
is that a deliberate action on
yes,
theirs?
for many of them, they believe the abortion was fine to have done. You should have done it under that circumstance, and they're actually encouraging women to have abortions. How many women on earth actually feel bad about having abortion, and yet the environment all around them, including their women friends, is encouraging them to have an abortion? Where do you think that influence comes from? It comes from many of the women spirits who have had abortions who have yet to deal with the fact that they're murderesses. That's where it comes from. And unfortunately, what I see happening too, if you're in the spirit world, what happened hundreds of years ago, like the primary cause of abortion, a lot of the cause of abortion were related to the men. Nowadays, unfortunately, much of the causes of abortion are related to the women. And as a result of that, there are many more women passing into the spirit world in the condition of a murderess, right? Someone who's committed murder, than there were many hundreds of years ago. And so what's happening now is the spirit world is, you think for the average person on earth, in a modern woman, like maybe under 30, many of them would instantly consider an abortion if their circumstances weren't completely right to have a baby. And so sometimes now there's even up to 20-30% of women of a certain age bracket and lower who are actually having abortions. And every one of them finishes up becoming a murderess. Every one of them enters the spirit world in that condition unless they work through these issues before then. And this is what I feel is very, very sad on the planet, is we see a growing number of women who would not be murderesses under normal circumstances are now, through society acceptance and through a lot of other factors, are now justifying the murder of children. And this is a very, very damaging thing to women's general plight. It would be far better if women went full term and gave away their child. However, there is so much stigma about that, that most women can't even consider that, can't even consider taking a child to full term and then giving away the child, because how much would society then say, what kind of a mother are you? And yet the society doesn't say, what kind of a mother are you having an abortion?
Well, I remember when I was nursing, there was a campaign going on around at the time, and I think it might have been on television.
Yep.
I can remember the brochures, and its phrase was, "Is adoption the best option?"
Yep.
Where it was encouraging. It was encouraging. I felt women to go full term and then adopt. And I don't know where it came from, whether it was.
There are many women on this planet who would love to have a child or more children and who cannot.
Yeah.
There are many single women on this planet who would love to have a child as well. And so, there are many people on the planet who would willingly take up. But adoption is made so difficult because of the legal problems that are associated with adoption. It's made so difficult. And it's made so difficult because of the general attitude of humanity, and that is this general attitude: if a mother gives away her child, she's a terrible person. So that's an underlying cause of why the attitude is so bad. Yeah. But if we had a totally different attitude, we would, it would be a really loving process to take the child to full term, give it to a person who has a desire to look after the child and love the child. I really liked there's a movie, it's a sort of fairly humorous movie, but there's a movie associated with that kind of thing that I'd advise people to watch, actually. It's called Juno.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
And it's just a lovely example of a young girl who decided to take the child to full term. All the ostracism she had to put up with by people around her and so forth, but she was quite definite, and the amount of love that she had in her to do that, and I just feel it's it's sort of a lovely movie demonstrating, I feel, what is possible. Unfortunately, though, there are a lot of complexities involved in taking a child full term when everybody around you feels differently, and so therefore there's a lot of peer pressure and external pressure to terminate. And there's a lot of peer pressure and external pressure to terminate under all sorts of circumstances, including possible defamation of the child and other types of circumstances. And these high amounts of pressure result in women taking decisions that they often later regret.
Did we cover repentance enough, do you believe?
Well, there's a lot more that can be said about repentance, but
it's
Mary in the book group is going through repentance a lot,
Yes,
and it is a different subject in its own right, because we have a lot of things to repent for, not just for committing abortions. But so I feel that is a subject that needs to be focused on quite a lot. If we can understand, if we do not repent from taking actions that we've taken out of harmony with love, then the law of compensation, the law of what you sow you will reap, will definitely come into action. And while many of the people on earth don't experience that while they're on earth, or they're not sensitive to the experience of it while they're on earth, they will definitely experience that in the spirit world. So if a person decides to ignore all of what I'm saying about abortion on earth and decides not to deal with the emotions while they're on earth, they will come face to face with these exact same emotions in the spirit world and have a very unhappy time in the spirit world after their entry into it, unless they address those emotions.
So let our last question be then, how can we best assist our brothers and sisters in the spirit world to understand this process of repentance?
I sort of feel like we need to best assist everybody, not just the brothers and sisters in the spirit world, but everybody, to understand the process of repentance. And one of the best ways to understand repentance is to actually tell the truth. Like, if you know the truth about something, then you know what you have to be sorry for and what you don't have to be sorry for. For example, religions on the planet often teach that masturbation is wrong, right? So many people pass over believing that sometimes they've arrived in a dark condition because they believe that they masturbated a lot during their life, and as a result of that, they passed over into a dark condition. Does that make sense? They believe that because they were told that by the ministers or priests that told them those particular things. Now, that is an example of an untruth being perpetrated upon a person, then passing and not understanding that it's got nothing to do with that as to why they might be in a dark condition. Does that make sense? So an untruth in this case stops them from progressing.
Yeah.
And quite often it's the untruths that are the problems. So what I feel is we need to understand the truth of the soul, the human soul. We need to understand the truth about the physical body, the spirit body. We need to understand the truth about all of these creations of God. Once we understand the truth about the gifts we've been given, the gift of love, the gift of free will, the gift of life, and so forth, once we understand these truths, we will have a much greater capacity to connect to our own sorrow about any time that we have been in disharmony with these truths. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. If we don't understand the truth, and the truth is never discussed, or the truth is ridiculed and laughed at, then at the end we can't address the emotion because we're going to deny the emotion. And because we're going to deny the emotion, we will never get past the point, and oftentimes we'll arrive in the spirit world not past the point, and often for many hundred years in the spirit world we will not even realise the point. So I feel the primary way to assist any single person, whether they be on earth or in the spirit world, is to tell them the truth. Not to judge them, because that is very unhelpful, and it's also very unloving, but to just tell the truth, just like I have in this interview with you. Tell the truth of how it is, and let the persons then come to their own conclusions and their own process. If you don't tell the truth, then you're not giving the other person any opportunity to grow.
So the more we speak
the truth.
Yep.
So the more I speak the truth to women who have had abortions about abortions.
Yep. And the more I speak to my women friends
in the spirit world and on earth
Yep.
about the issue of abortion, the more truth they will know. The more truth they will know, the less inclined they will feel to make decisions that are out of harmony with love and out of harmony with truth.
Yeah.
That's a natural consequence. If we don't say any truth, and also it's very important not to say it in a spirit of judgment, because the judgment in itself will prevent the person from accepting the truth. So what we need to do is to state the truth without the corresponding feeling of judgment. And then so when you came and first discussed abortion with me, you did not feel judged, even though I spoke the truth. Right, because I still loved you and I still hugged you and I still cared for you exactly the same way before and afterwards. And as a result of that, you know that there's a higher likelihood of the person receiving the truth.
It's a totally different feeling from my point of view, and I'm sure everybody's point of view. It's a totally different feeling than somebody discussing it with you that is judging you. It just never enters you. Yeah. So truth with judgment, I now realise, can never enter you.
It's very hard. Well, you have to be a very humble person for truth with judgment to enter you, I should say. It is possible for truth to enter you, even though it comes with judgment, but you have to be a very, very humble individual for that to occur. You have to cope with a lot of quite hard emotions that most people find very difficult to cope with. It is much easier for a person who hasn't that degree of humility to accept truth without judgment, and this is why. And judgment in itself is an unloving act, and an act based on violence. It's a way of attacking the person, and any attack, whether it be emotional or physical, is an act of violence. So a judgment of another person is an act of violence perpetrated by yourself towards the other person. And if we judge any person, including a person who has committed an abortion, a person who has raped, a person who has murdered, a person who has child molested, a person, and we keep listing all of these different things that we might feel judgment about, if we judge them, it's very, very hard to help them heal, and it's very hard to help them change. And also there's often quite a lot of anger associated with the judgment inside of us, which is about our own hurt and our own feelings of sadness and grief that we need to experience. Yeah? And those emotions prevent even those people from healing, because they have to be very humble to absorb our judgment if they are going to still heal. It's far better if we can discuss these truths openly without judgment. Now everybody has the ability to go, okay, if I had an abortion, yes, okay, AJ's saying I've got to not be hard on myself here, I've got to work through the emotions, I don't have to feel condemned by the universe, but I do need to work through these emotions. If I don't, then I've got some issues with life, I've got some issues with free will, I've got quite a number of issues which are going to make my soul dark here, and I can address those particular issues. And if I can do that without judgment, now I've got the ability to recover from them quite quite a lot more easily than if the world around me judges me completely for that action. And this is why anger, the right to life movement in the USA, for example, which is very much born in anger. For a lot of people, doesn't have very much effect on people who have abortions, because it has so much judgment towards them without any understanding of all of the conditions that create it, that the persons who commit abortions even feel more resistance to even listening to the truth of it. And that's why I feel those kind of movements are not very beneficial in the end. They are beneficial if they were brought into harmony with love, without the anger, without the judgment, then they'd be beneficial. But with the anger and the judgment, they're not very beneficial. They just add to the problem.
Thank you, Anthony.
Now, were they all the questions? Were they, or because there were some questions you had about
I think I skipped
pretty
a page
much all
there.
of them.
Yeah,
Wasn't it?
I think we covered every topic. I didn't ask every specific question.
Yep.
Is there something you feel that I
No,
missed
that's
out
fine.
on?
I feel that was quite good coverage of it. There is a lot more that can be said on any subject, of course.
Look, I have a collection of. I've put it under the heading of hypothetical moral questions that have come from the community at large, and there's probably 6 pages of that.
Wow. Yeah.
So if you would like in a second section to have and just answer them.
Sort of a discussion of moral, of
the
hypotheticals.
situations.
Yeah.
If you want to do that, we could have a second interview.
Sure.
If you felt that was needed.
All hypothetical situations are interesting because they do help us to analyse a lot of issues. The problem with a lot of hypothetical situations, though, is we need to include the analysis right across the board, not just...
Yes.
So a lot of these questions will
Very
raise
specific
issues about lots of different matters rather than just the matter of abortion.
Yeah.
So...
and that's very true.
And that's important.
That's why when I started reading them, I thought, okay, wow, these are great questions, but they're all encompassing as well.
So I don't mind handling them as long as in the next section we're willing to sort of digress a little.
Yes,
because there will be issues of points of like when is a child, when how incarnation occurs and all these other things, and so. My suggestion to people who are investigating these matters further would be if they listen to some of the introductory presentations I've made about the secrets of the universe and how incarnation actually occurs, the process of incarnation onto Earth and the process of the creation of the bodies and all of those kind of things, then they'll have a lot better background. I feel to understand my answers that I've given to you in this discussion, and also the answers that we might discuss with regard to a future discussion on abortion with regard to hypothetical situations. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Sounds good, Barb.
Thank you, and thank you for your time.
It's a pleasure.
It's
always
lovely.
a pleasure. Yeah.
It's always a pleasure to share
And I know you were a
time
bit
with you.
nervous at the start of this, and you did well with that, so that's very good.
I was. I don't know whether I was nervous for me or for my brothers and sisters. I don't know, but anyway, we got through it.
That's no worries. So thanks for your time, and we'd like to just thank the time of the people who've been videoing as well.
Thanks, guys.
There's Igor behind that camera. If you guys show each other, there's Vlad behind that camera.
Smile, Vlad.
And also I think Lena, who's just sitting down there, she was behind. We had a small audience listening to the discussion as well. So we'd just like to thank you guys for being quiet and able to cope with the last 2 hours.
Thank you. Thanks, Anthony.
Thanks, Barbara. There was a question that you asked earlier about the issue of whether there are any aborted children that are earthbound, and in terms of connection with their mothers, their own mothers or their own fathers on Earth. And I answered that I don't know of any aborted children on Earth that are still connected to their mothers and fathers on Earth, and therefore earthbound. However, I must point out that there are a very, very large group of aborted children on Earth who are earthbound, who are prevented from entering the spirit world into the spheres, into getting any assistance, by groups of spirits who are earthbound as well, who grab these children and hold on to them very, very strongly before they actually complete the process of passing. And these spirits hold these children in the earthbound condition because of their own condition, and many of them are For example, if I give some example, there is a group of Chinese women spirits who are very, very angry with the government about the one-child policy, and every single child that's aborted in China, they try to actually grab hold of and nurse themselves, rather than allow them to go to Summerland and be looked after by a spirit in a higher condition. And those particular aborted children are earthbound.
Are their intentions good intentions?
Their intention is based on rage. So an intention based on rage can never be good. Their intention is based on rage with the government. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Rage with the Chinese government in this case. And so their intention is not a good intention. They don't see it like that, though. They see their rage as a justified rage, and therefore they're justifying the holding of the children onto the children. And there are many celestial spirits at the moment waiting to take these children and give them a much better environment to grow up in. But unfortunately, these children are being held onto by these spirits, and unfortunately not able to be assisted very well. And as a result, they don't grow very well either. So they're very stunted in their growth. And until these celestial spirits can actually hold on to them and help them, they will remain so. But it's the rage of these women spirits towards the government that keeps these women spirits on earth, and that's what causes them to grab hold of the children as soon as they pass. So there are earthbound aborted children, but they are not connected to their parents.
It's for a different reason.
It's for a different reason.
You say that they're stunted in growth. Do they get to a stage where, in age, where they would activate their free will and remove themselves from that?
Well, because it's very hard for them to grow in this condition, and they don't have much of an intellectual concept of what they're doing. They're only bound by the desire of these spirits to be bound to them. Because of that, they can potentially stay in this condition for hundreds of years without really knowing that they're in that condition, if that makes sense. So it's a very sad condition for the aborted child, but it's also driven by this rage that these women spirits feel towards the government. So if these women spirits could release some of their rage, and some people are trying to help them, that would also then release these aborted children so that they could go their way and then get looked after afterwards. Yeah. So I just thought I needed to clarify that.
Thank you, AJ.
Just because there are no aborted children that I know of that are actually connected to their mother and father who aborted them when the mother and father had no desire, had a desire to abort them. But there are children, spirits, aborted children, who are earthbound because of these earthbound spirits catching hold of them and having a very, very strong feeling for them that they need to protect them and look after them, and that binds them together. And so what we're trying to do is assist those groups of spirits so that they no longer do that, and then the people who are best able to look after them in the spirit world can look after them.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much.
Thanks, Igor.
Thank you.